Everybody, welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm Matt Connerton, and of course, to my right, as always, the Honorable Gary S. Hopper.
Matt!
What does the S stand for? Is it for savings?
No, it's for Sean.
Oh, it'd be cool if it was for savings, because you're a Republican. You're a fiscal conservative.
Yeah, or psychopath.
Oh, I think our guest is here.
Psychopath would be cool.
Yes.
But that's a P, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
But
so it could be like a psychopath who doesn't spell very well.
Right.
So it would be S-Y copath.
There you go.
Right? So you could have, so S could stand for psychopath for the spelling challenge. Greg!
How are you?
Top of the evening.
Hello, sir.
How are you?
Good, good.
You realize it was Taste of Manchester tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Parking was a little more complicated than anticipated.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what we were just over across the street for a Taste of Manchester. How much does it cost to get a ticket, you know?
You know, I don't. It's
You don't?
kind of interesting because I used to live right here in downtown Manchester, and I don't.
Oh, I
anymore.
thought you did.
No.
That's one reason I booked you, because I figured, it's easy to get right across the street.
No, I live in Bedford now.
Oh, you moved up, huh?
That's right.
Big city.
For big city. I left a big city.
Right, I mean, just, pretty highfalutin. Bedford's pretty highfalutin, Greg.
Well, it's just...
You're getting pretty impotent.
Wow, that's a little
Damn
personal.
impotent.
Oh, my.
Damn impotent.
Oh, well.
So anyway, we had Judiciary Committee today. We had...
I can pull out my MacBook if
no, that wasn't...
you'd like to refer.
Oh, you can, but that's not it yet.
I'm just trying to be,
Senate Resolution SR 21, I think it was, about a constitutional amendment to not discriminate against sexual orientation. And so we're going through the talk and the executive session, and in my mind, sexual orientation would be like, the positions, how you're orientated. And I don't see why that's the government's business.
I'd have to agree
if
with
you
there,
use
Gary.
do the missionary position or something, why is that the government have anything to do with that?
Well, it's just, first of all, it seems like if you give legislators a chance to legislate, they'll find interesting things to stick their nose in the middle of when they shouldn't. Let's take that as a default basis. And once you've operated under that theory, there's always ways to validate that theory, and there's never a shortage of legislators who will live up to that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I don't think sticking your nose in the
No, that
middle,
wasn't
though, that's
necessarily
not
a good
missionary.
description.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
probably different.
More information than any of us
probably
need to know.
That's probably one of those different sexual orientations we were.
Welcome to Rock, Paper, After Dark.
Anyway, so the committee voted not to do anything with it. It's actually kind of ridiculous because at this stage of the game, Senate resolution means it's a constitutional amendment, and at this stage we couldn't vote on a constitutional
couldn't get it on the ballot
amendment
anyway. Right, it's too late to put on the ballot. The ballots have already been printed, or for the most part, or they're in the process of being printed.
So that's what we're doing in Judiciary. We voted on 3 things to try to override the governor's veto, and they word it wrong on the news. They say how do they say it? They basically said, I think the way they stated on the news is that the legislature supported the governor's position, which isn't really true. What's true is that the legislature didn't have the necessary 2/3 vote to override her. Right. But in a couple of cases, I think we had a majority vote to override.
Correct. I think that's one of the things that people find confusing. So they supported the governor's position. Well, if the vote were exactly the same as it was, that still doesn't necessarily mean you would have overridden the governor's position in the first place. Because if something passes with 10 votes to spare, or 15 votes to spare, or 20 votes to spare, but then it passes with the exact same number on a veto override, it's going to fail.
Right.
So it's just a much higher bar to pass it. There are some states. The state of Arkansas is a great example where to override the governor's veto, you only need a majority. So what's the purpose of vetoing a bill?
Right, yeah.
They already sent it to you once, so they've already showed your hand which way they're going to vote. So,
That's interesting.
so it's an interest.
The veto becomes almost irrelevant.
Right. So they've really sort of scaled down the power of the governor. And considering how little power we give the governor here in New Hampshire, it's a surprise we haven't thought about that one. How come legislators like you haven't thought about that one, Gary?
No, I hadn't thought of that because it seems dumb. I mean, that's what the veto's for, is to... Why do we have tape right here? What does it say?
Please do not touch the microphone.
Oh,
You know,
it
'cause
should have
some
something
people-
about please don't touch the tape that says please don't. You have to add another one over here. Please
That's a
don't
good-
touch the tape that says please don't touch the microphone.
That's a good
Because
idea.
that's getting peeled back.
You're always thinking.
I know. Sorry. Anyway, so you are the director of
Americans for Prosperity
in
here in New Hampshire. Correct.
Americans for Prosperity, New Hampshire. Now, what I was curious about is what bills do you follow? Are they just right to work? Is it like, Americans for Prosperity is only right to work, and we don't
No.
care about anything else?
No. There's actually the National Right to Work is here in New Hampshire, and they're focused exclusively on right to work.
Okay.
We focus on issues dealing with economic prosperity, and that actually is a broader array of issues. So, for example, we're focused on issues like health care.
Right.
So we opposed, for example, Obamacare Medicaid expansion when it came to the
Oh,
House floor.
before you go further, I was talking to my pharmacist today.
Mm-hmm.
Are you
This
sorry?
isn't going to go back into being impotent, is it?
No.
Okay.
No. I know. That's a different show. And she was saying because of Obamacare, the drug companies know or presume everybody's insured, so they've come up with excuses why they can't make certain generic drugs, and said we have a shortage of dilithium crystals. So now they're saying, well, because of the shortage and it's harder to make it, they're like, she said there was like one pill that would cost her like $30 for 200, and they're now like $30 a piece or something like that. It's like the price for some of these generic drugs are going through the roof because the pharmaceutical companies know the government's going to pay it anyway. So
Right.
who cares?
I think it shows just the how when you write a piece of legislation that doesn't recognize or understand the importance of how markets work.
Right.
It shows that when you take a market that was already inefficient and make it even more inefficient, you start to see huge price spikes.
Right.
So that's what you've done is you've taken a market that was already overly regulated and thus had, as you saw, massive price differences on the issues, which frequently the generic is the same, and biologically it has to be, or it can't get FDA approval.
Right.
It's the same product, but just has a different brand name on it.
Yeah.
And it's much cheaper. Now they find a way by putting all these additional regulations, by putting all these additional barriers in place, you've created an incentive for pharmaceutical companies to make the marketplace even more inefficient so that they can drive up their benefits. And it works out well if you're a pharmaceutical company. I haven't seen too many of them going broke.
Well, they helped.
But they're taking advantage of the marketplace that's given to them.
I'm
Why
sure
wouldn't you?
they had a hand in writing the legislation too.
Yeah, when you have a piece of legislation that's 2,100 pages long, there were a lot of hands in there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Lot
So
of
it's the
cooks in that
insurance
kitchen.
companies. So Americans for Prosperity, we definitely focus on healthcare,
Right.
trying to create a more free market for healthcare, get away from issues like Obamacare, whether it's a case where you have mandates and regulations, which makes a sameness for health insurance. So Gary, I mean, I hate to say it, but you probably don't need pregnancy coverage. But I'm glad you have maternity coverage, but you probably don't need it at this point.
I would been worried about that.
Exactly. I mean, we're concerned about you
I
getting
just wanted
pregnant.
maternity leave, though.
Well, unfortunately, you might. I don't know that Obamacare gives you that, but it does make sure that you have maternity
That's
coverage.
sexist.
We do think it's
exactly.
about time you settled down, maybe started a family. Gary.
Exactly,
Thank you.
exactly.
Thank you.
But so we work on issues like that, getting rid of things at the state level, like the Certificate of Need Board, which artificially constricts supply on for healthcare providers. Issues like that. But beyond that, we also focus on issues like energy. As you know, Reggie has been a huge
Reggie's
issue.
huge, yeah.
The renewable portfolio standards, which drives up costs for electricity. And
on that, did you hear the same report I did about the? I think it's Antarctic has like record
ice shelf,
levels?
yes.
The shelf like all-time record.
Right, and this keep
quantity
in mind that it's on the other side of the equator. So right now it's the end of their winter. So this is as
Right.
big as it's going to get. So right about now is when you'd expect it to be at its biggest, and where it is now
It's
compared
bigger
to
than
other
it's
years,
ever
it's
been.
bigger than it's ever been before. So
Right.
so the
global warming's kicking butt. You know what I noticed on national propaganda radio, and this is the first time I've noticed, so I don't know if it's a trend. Okay, I'd have to listen to this over years to actually know this, but they reported on the ridiculous hot weather in Southern California. I wonder now if they typically do that. Like, in other words, every area has spells where they're really, really hot or really, really cold, right? Like right now, New England, I think this is the coldest summer that I can actually remember.
The coldest summer?
I think so.
We didn't have many 90-degree days.
We didn't
though.
have any, like maybe
just a
one
handful-
or two.
handful
We didn't
of-
have any 100-degree weather.
Seems like July was pretty hot.
Not compared to other years, I don't think.
Really?
But I'm just guessing. I don't know. But my point is, National Propaganda Radio absolutely reported on this heat wave in Southern California.
But not Antarctica. They didn't report
No,
on
they
that.
didn't report that. And I also wonder if they do that deliberately. In other words, if there's another heat wave, somewhere else, they'll report that. But if there's a huge inexplicable cold spell somewhere, if they kind of shy away from reporting that.
Well, I think that generally speaking, it's important to understand how the media work as well. Obviously, Southern California is a major media market. The LA is number 2 media market. So part of it is if something happens in New York or LA, it becomes bigger news than if it happens in Nebraska.
True. Yeah.
That's just
You're telling me the stuff that happens in Nebraska?
and you wouldn't know about it because the media won't cover it. But
You got to listen to that Springsteen
So-
album. That'll give you an idea of what goes on there.
Exactly. So, but I think it's important to understand that stuff that happens in major media markets gets played up a lot more than others. But I do think that you raise a good point because if you listen to a lot of these major media outlets, you'll hear about the heat wave in L.A., but you won't hear anything about the record level of ice sheet in Antarctica. So I think that there is sort of an effort to focus
Antarctica
and shape.
isn't a huge media market.
No, historically, unless you're trying to appeal to penguins,
Right.
It's not hasn't been
Because they don't have Wi-Fi. Penguins don't.
We do hear, though, in fairness, we do hear about extreme cold, like the Arctic, what do they call it, the Arctic chill or whatever that happened last winter because
the polar vortex.
The polar vortex. Thank you.
But did we hear about that only in New England because we were experiencing it, or was that national news? I don't know.
Well, that was national news. It was the Midwest. It was really affected.
Right,
They had
but
like 30
well,
degrees
but
below
it wasn't
zero.
major national news when it hit the Midwest. As soon as it hit New England and New York media markets, that's when it became major national news.
I don't agree. I saw a lot of national, but the thing is, I mean, it's not because it's not. If you're talking about global warming, which people don't really use that term anymore, it's different than if you're talking about climate change.
Yeah, but climate change doesn't mean anything.
It means extreme weather patterns, accelerated extreme
one of
weather
the-
patterns
one
that
of
are
the-
becoming more common.
One of the arguments that I find interesting on this particular issue, and I'm not going to label the issue because it's like shooting at a moving target, is just the vernacular that has changed. It went from global warming, which is pretty straightforward, to climate change, to climate disruption, to extreme weather.
Right.
So the language that the left is using continues to move and change and shape because every time they sort of put their foot down on one thing, the science is stubbornly won't follow along with them. I mean, the climate stubbornly will not follow along with what Al Gore said. He said that the polar ice caps in the north at the end of summer by now would be completely without ice.
Sure. Oh,
Unfortunately, the folks in the Arctic can't seem to swim across because these large chunks of ice that happen to be in the way.
Right.
So
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, that's true. That they. Oh gosh,
But the science changes too as we learn more.
Well,
it's not a static thing. And
Well, that's just but they keep changing the science. In other words, they keep I was listening to National Propaganda Radio the other day, and they said that and talking about things that we have to do right away because it's an emergency, because our even our most optimistic models say that this ABC is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Their models have never been right yet.
yeah, the hockey stick. Remember the hockey stick? Which
Right.
which
I'm just saying
straight
though,
up.
science constantly changes as you bring in new information. It's not like okay, they've been wrong about something, so that means that they're never right about anything.
If you based upon a small amount from their perspective, a small amount of data, and they said, well, we have all that much more now, and they continues to use data that don't validate their theory, and then say it validates their theory. That's the problem. And I think folks like Gary probably appreciate that back in the late 60s and early 70s when they're talking about global cooling,
Yeah, it was
how we're going to have a
cooling
whole
out.
nother ice age thanks to pollution. Well, that same pollution is now going to burn the planet. It's kind of confusing. I think
Well, there is a theory that there may be an upside to global warming or climate change or whatever you want to call it, because if you because there are some who say we may have actually staved off another ice age because we're overdue. We're actually overdue for another ice age, so that
but
warming the planet may have actually been good for us.
The real issue, though, isn't so much necessarily about who's right and who's wrong, because that's always great to go out to a bar or a restaurant, have a beer, and talk about who's right and who's wrong based upon science. And scientists have been doing that for years. The two issues are, first of all, when the rubber meets the road and you decide you're going to actually have a policy intervention to do something about it. When that happens, and you do as, for example, President did on what's been described by many people as the so-called war on coal, but that's not even so much coal. It's basically all plants that use a lot of fossil fuels, and you say we're going to put new regulations and new restrictions and new limitations in place, which are going to basically eliminate certain types of electricity producers. But when you're talking about electricity that costs maybe 7 cents a kilowatt, and say, oh no, we want to replace it with recyclables, renewables that come in at 28 cents a kilowatt, there's a real world impact when people have to pay a lot more for their electricity.
Pretty severe economic consequence for that. Yeah.
And when one country does it in a global marketplace, what it does is business people aren't stupid. They're not going to eat those costs. They're going to ship the manufacturing to countries where their fixed costs are lower. And then what the administration has to do then is try to convince all these other countries to follow along with what we've done. And when they say, no, we actually like having jobs in business here, particularly countries that don't have a lot of jobs in business, and they want to be able to feed their people and improve their quality of life, what happens is we lose jobs. And when the jobs leave, when manufacturing jobs leave, they don't come back.
Right.
Usually, it's just a case where America's losing its manufacturing base, and we're large part because a lot of our energy costs and our other fixed costs are simply too high. Pass Obamacare, increasing health care costs. Pass electricity regulation, increase the cost of energy. Have an uncompetitive tax code, which limits the ability for people to compete.
Yeah.
Then talk about how you're going to attack companies which say, hey, look, this doesn't make sense for us. We're going to go offshore to do our work. Say, oh, but you're being a bad U.S. citizen. Question your patriotism because you've made. You engage a whole lot of policy that makes it uncompetitive to do there.
You drive them out.
You drive them out, and then you say they're unpatriotic for leaving.
Right.
So that's the bigger issue. So listen, our attitude is let's just make the state and the country more competitive. Let's get it out of the way. And in New Hampshire, that means freeing up the labor markets. It means lowering an uncompetitive business tax rate, lowering uncompetitive electric costs, lowering uncompetitive health costs, so that businesses want to come in here and create jobs.
Yeah, because one of our problems in the state has always been electrical prices. I know that when I was discussing things on the House floor, I voted against right to work, and people say, no, that's why nobody comes in. And I says, no, I think it's got a lot more.
It's a lot more to it.
Variables.
There's a lot of variables.
It's
one piece to a much larger puzzle, and if you attack them all and you go after them all, you can't have the third highest business taxes in the country being even higher than Massachusetts, Maine, and Vermont, all your regional neighbors. You can't have among the highest electricity rates. You can't have what are probably the second highest healthcare costs. And by the way, before she's Senator Shaheen now, but when she was a state senator, she passed community rating law. It was her legislation back in 1994. When that bill passed, when that legislation took effect, New Hampshire had the second lowest health insurance costs in the nation.
Yeah, we had a lot of competition.
So we managed to go from 26 insurance companies in the state, and we managed to go from 49th to second.
That's brutal.
And so
that's quite a swing.
So we're passing Reggie. We're passing these health
Can you
care.
explain because we say Reggie?
Yeah,
The regional greenhouse gas initiative.
What it is.
The regional greenhouse gas initiative is a regional. Some Northeast states got together to create a cap and trade program. So they sort of they've got a program that actually limits the amount of emissions in carbon dioxide and says if you want to exceed them, you have to buy credits elsewhere. So the goal here is to try to shift from certain types of fuels to other types of fuels. The problem is you're shifting from economically competitive to economically uncompetitive fuel sources, and when your costs for buying those electricities are triple or quadruple the cost of the more efficient markets, then the net effect is to drive up the costs of for everybody in terms of the rates. And that's coupled with another thing called RPS, which means Renewable Portfolio Standard, which says a certain percentage of electricity that you buy when you go and buy off the grid has to be made from solar, wind, etc. And again, those are not competitive electricity manufacturing mechanisms, and as a result of it, again, it drives up energy costs.
Yeah.
And so we know we have high healthcare costs. We know we have high electricity costs. We know we have high business taxes, and we don't have the competitive advantage we would have if we were to pass right to work. And if you look at all those things, and as you say, it's not one, but you have to if you want to go after all four of them or some subset, start somewhere. And then at that point, that's when you start to break through and be able to start to bring businesses, because you have to be able to sell New Hampshire as having something special and different. We don't have many large manufacturers or large corporations located in New Hampshire. We have BAE Systems in Nashua. We have Fidelity in Merrimack. I don't
know if that's
Velcro, Timberland, some, but not many. Not like if you go to other states.
But I think if you look at BAE and Velcro and stuff like that, a lot of them I think are here only because they started here back when the market was competitive.
Right, and that's a great point.
They don't want to leave,
and
we're not attracting new ones.
Other than Fidelity,
Okay.
Can you think of a major corporation that's come here and created several thousands of jobs? You
Walmart.
Can't. Well, Walmart, and that's about it. So Walmart, maybe Target,
yeah,
maybe some of the other retailers, but not the type of
Yeah, those are low-paying jobs.
Not the type of jobs that we want to see here, and not the type of job that's going to keep younger people in the state. Right now, we have if you were to look and sort of look at the population of New Hampshire based upon the country, if you look at right about age 20, there's a big divot taken out, and then there's an oversupply once you get beyond the age of 40. And by the way, the people who leave don't come back as adults. New people come back as adults, and and that's one of the reasons why we have such a transient state. I know that there was a review of the couple of years ago.
Trans, and is that back to the sexual orientation things?
That's something totally different.
No, it's like we have a lot of vampires, like Transylvania.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
But three-quarters of the state representatives were not born here. There was a study done by I believe it was the New York Times. Came out and they said it was 58% of the adult population. 58% of the population and about 62% of the adult population in New Hampshire were not born here. So we're not
pass legislation
to build borders, keep everybody in.
Trying to
turn into a concentration camp, Gary.
No, when I think it was my first term, there was I forget what his name was, legislator, and I probably have this not quite right, but it's something to the effect he had a friend that wasn't born in New Hampshire, but they lived here all their life and wanted to change their place of birth after they died to say they lived in New Hampshire for some reason. It was something like that.
I thought that only happened in Maine.
No, but I'm thinking if we pass legislation, we can pass legislation to grant
native status
to all state legislators.
Oh, there you go.
And that would fix that.
I see your first bill for next year.
No, that's not the first one. We got another one that's even better than that.
Oh, good.
You gotta understand, Gary's always thinking.
That's right.
Yeah. No, my right out here on Elm Street on July. What?
I know where you're going.
Out here on Elm Street on July 10th, I was my grandson and I were on my motorcycle, and I got rear-ended.
No, that's too bad.
By a 17-year-old boy. My grandson flew about 10 feet, but he was okay. He bounced better than me. But I hit pretty hard, and I ended up with a rotator cuff surgery. I still can't lift up my arm.
You can't rotate his cuff.
I can't rotate my cuff anymore. And so he was 17. It was Elm Street. It was summer. I'm pretty sure he was girl watching, right? Now, if I could pass legislation that could prevent that from happening to some other person, wouldn't that be a good thing? So my legislation that I'm going to introduce is to require all women to wear burqas.
He thinks outside the box. You got to give him credit for that.
It's
He
definitely
does think
different.
outside the box.
But then somebody pointed out if I do that, there's so many armed women who might shoot me that I probably have to do something about disarming them first.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's a second year or first year I'll do that.
Yeah, well, you've actually got to think this one through.
I got to be careful.
I
You
think
can get that into the platform.
Yes, I'll add that to the
There you
platform.
go.
one more plank.
One more plank, yes.
So
I'll
no,
have me walking the plank by
it-
the time I'm done. Go ahead.
I definitely think it's a case where it's going to be an interesting session. Obviously, it'll depend on who ultimately gets elected and in terms of what the makeup of the legislature is. But I think that there are a lot of new faces we're going to see.
Oh, there always is.
I know that there always are, but I think that this particular year in particular, we're going to see a lot fewer of the candidates who have served. And I know that you remember in 2011 and 2012, there were 163 reps who had never served before.
Right.
And I think you might see another situation similar to that in 2000 and 2015 and 16. And what that means is people, the good and the bad, they don't know the things that have already been tried and failed.
A million times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they also bring some new ideas and some new energy because they're not sort of
Jaded.
or held up by what I call a tyranny of custom.
Right.
And so they're willing to try some new
A
ideas.
tyranny of custom.
Correct. So
That's that's pretty clever.
It's also an Iron Maiden song, I think.
Oh, okay.
But maybe we'll have Iron Maiden as a state
State
band,
symbol?
state song. Yeah, maybe the state symbol. We can
Right,
do that.
right. Instead of the old man in the
That's right. It's going to be an Iron Maiden.
Be awesome.
Yeah, but it's definitely going to be a lot of energy, I think, up there in Concord next year, and I think that's a good thing. I think that it's a change election. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
So I think that when you start to see those types of change elections, there's a lot of new people brought into the mix.
Is that a record, 163 new people?
I don't know the answer to that. Probably not. I mean,
Really?
back when the legislature.
Well, we get usually 30% turnover
Right.
every 2 years. So
Oh, wow.
But some of the people who are those 30% new people coming in, some of those folks are people who have served before.
right.
Oh, okay.
But we do have a 30% turnover. So, that's 130 some odd people.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's a lot.
150
Okay.
something or 60 is not really that.
But
great
163
to
who had never served before.
Right, I know.
And
But just-
and so they don't have any sense of institutionally what the legislature has done in the past, what it might do in the future, and that can be good and bad. It cuts both ways. It's
Yeah.
a lot of time of Gary telling the freshmen, just be quiet,
no, actually, I don't do that. Actually, I tend to encourage them to.
speak up.
Yeah, absolutely. I did Tim. Oh gosh, just lost it. Dan, it's his little buddy,
Oh, Tim Comerford.
Tim Comerford. He was a freshman, and I needed somebody to do a PI, and he was there. And I said, "Okay, I need you to do a PI." He said, "Well, I've never done it." I said, "Good, that's a good chance." Because a PI, for the people that don't know, is
Parliamentary
inquiry, which basically gives people a heads up of what they're voting on, because most of them have been in the anteroom drinking coffee or drinking,
Something.
drinking something. And so when they come back to their seats to vote, you do a PI to remind people of what's going on almost. And it's usually very short, or if it's a good one, it's very short. And so I had Tim do that. John Burt, I forget what I did with him his freshman year. He ended up being pretty assertive, and I pushed him because I don't agree with the old people should be the only ones jawing away.
Right, right. And no, there's no question that the first time someone gets up and speaks, everyone sort of pays attention because they want. First of all, it's kind of like waiting for an accident to happen. You kind of watch it just because you don't know what could happen. It's like this could be interesting.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of it. But also they want to sort of take the measure of folks for the first time. They've seen them get up into the well and give a speech. But it should be an interesting year. I think that depends on what the situation is with the budget. We won't have a sense of that till the end of this month. As you know, September 30th, the state releases what they call the CAF, or the Certified Financial Report, Certified Annual Financial Report, where they basically the state opens its books and lets everyone see what happened in the prior
How much money
fiscal
they
year.
made and stuff.
Exactly.
If it goes to September, it should be pretty good because I think we had probably one of the easiest summers. I mean, we've had some summers that rained almost every weekend. We had like nothing.
Well,
this
this actually looks back just for the fiscal year that ended on June 30th. So they give it a few months to basically get all the books in order, and
year. So that won't help.
yeah, no, but the expectation is that there will be a deficit, and potentially we're looking at a going into the next year with a deficit. So the first order of business for the legislature might be find some ways to make some cuts right out of the gate to sort of make sure the budget balances, because we don't, as you know, we don't have a rainy day fund here anymore. That's been depleted. They some prior legislatures burned through that when they needed some cash to spend on some things.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how the Republicans get in and they cut and cut, and then Democrats get in and they make reasons why they got to spend it and tax it. And
the prior budget, the one that actually did something pretty remarkable, it reduced spending by 11%, and that's
what that I told this on the air with Uncle Matt here.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that the people of the state of New Hampshire said we need you to tighten your belt, and the legislature actually accomplished that.
Right. It's probably one of the greatest political achievements in our time.
Right, and the voters did not seem to care.
Well, I got to tell you,
because they knocked a lot of people out.
Well, I think it's just par for the course. Unfortunately, there are some folks out there, such as yourself, where you've been around a while and the voters know who you are. But for a lot of these folks, they don't know necessarily who their representative is, or who sometimes either the senator is.
With you. I think they really don't know who I am, and that's why I get voted in every 2 years.
There's probably some truth to that. But there's a knight named Hopper. It reminds him of something.
Yeah. Dennis.
But the bottom line though is that they tend to vote down the bottom of the ticket the way they voted at the top of the ticket, and so if it's a Democratic year, their chances are they're going to vote Democrat. If it's a Republican year, chances are they're going to vote Republican further down the ballot. But ultimately, when you look at the accomplishments of that legislature, one of the things that budget, not only was it able to do it, again, the remarkable thing of actually doing what you're saying you're going to do, of cutting spending by 11%, but it actually also produced a $75 million surplus. Now, what's remarkable about that is this legislature spent $57 million of that 75 before it had even come in. And then,
that's talent,
and that's just pretty impressive. And then they're looking to try to find ways to spend the remainder, which should go to the rainy day fund, which is only $9 million. Which, when you consider that we have a $10.5 billion budget, $10.6 billion budget.
Right.
That you've only got a $9 million rainy day fund.
That's not much.
That's more like a sprinkle. It's maybe like a spritz.
Right.
It's not a rainy day.
Yeah, going back to the Reggie gases, that's one of the things that I haven't been that supportive of Northern Pass. It's if you look at all the propositions that have come forward with, it doesn't reduce the price of electricity to New Hampshire. We lose all this beautiful, woods and land and all this other stuff. We allow our our state to get scarred, and our electric prices stay the same.
Well, the thing about
but that's renewable.
It is renewable,
which people might not understand. That's all renewable electricity too.
Part of the larger. If you look at the Northern Pass as a whole, part of the market forces that's driving the whole exercise is the fact that states further south of us need to have renewable energy to meet the mandates that they put in place. So they passed bad laws that put these huge mandates in place. And as a result, they need access to more renewable energy. And they're going to the goal is to run the power down from Quebec to get it to these folks so that they can meet their mandates that they set for themselves. And that's one of the more challenging issues is ask yourself, okay, wouldn't it have just been easier not to pass these mandates, or to maybe pass a law to adjust the mandates? But folks in Connecticut don't really care because it's not going to them. It's not being run down through their state. So so but I think it's an important takeaway from consequences of legislation.
Right.
And people who, when they were passing these laws 10 years ago, weren't thinking about what the net effect would be, and weren't thinking about what the impacts might be in the downstream impacts. They just said, "Oh, well, we want clean environment." Well, I haven't met one person, even folks who like coal plants, who says, "I want to have filthy air and filthy
Right.
water." You don't find those folks. And so the focus is how can you make it economical, and how can you make it clean and still stay economical. And there are ways of doing that.
Well, I know the thing is that coal.
We don't really have one plant that uses coal consistently. It's the Merrimack Station
No, but
in Bow.
if you look at the eastern seaboard, because coal is so plentiful, it provides a lot of the electricity for the eastern seaboard. I forget. I remember hearing the percentage, but it was like 40% or something like that. So if you start restricting that,
Right. I mean, there's a lot of coal in the Northeast, particularly in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, that area.
yeah.
Parts of southeastern Ohio. There's a lot of coal that's available, and it's relatively easy to mine and to extract and to utilize.
And who's going to come up with country songs if you don't have coal mines?
Exactly. If you can't have a coal miner daughter, you need a coal
Right.
miner, right?
Right, exactly.
but obviously in the Midwest they have a lot more oil and natural gas resources, and then here in the Northeast we have granite, which is great. I mean, I know some folks like your former colleague, now State Senator Sam Cataldo, who's really excited about geothermal, which is a nice byproduct. But unless we want to spend all our time drilling holes in the ground, which might be great for Kyle Tasker, but not necessarily great
Right.
for any of the rest of us, just to have giant holes drilled throughout the entire place to try
Well, the
to
thing is,
boil
and-
water in the
Any of those, the geothermal or any of those, are going to have an effect.
right.
There's, like, for instance, if you went to, let's say you went to solar, which right now would not be logical. People, the reason our summers are hotter in July and August rather than June, when the sun's actually the highest, or we had the longest days, is because the Earth has had time to heat up.
Right.
And that radiates back through the days, and that's why our summers are so warm. Well, in theory, if you put solar panels out in too large an area, well, that land isn't going to heat up, and your summers you're going to freeze, because you know what I mean. In theory,
Sure,
I'm exaggerating
Sure.
it to make a point, but solar panels would actually have a profound negative effect on the environment if you used them too much.
Well, everything has a
Wind
consequence.
is wicked horrible.
Wind does a great job of chopping up birds, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to slice
endangered
and dice,
wildlife, if you want, I mean, people don't realize that what those tips of those windmills are sometimes going about 200 miles an hour.
Right.
When that hits a bird, that's the end of that bird. And I actually have some friends who are bird watchers and pretty
and they
intense
just watch
bird
them
watchers.
fall, and
No, but they'll say you go to the windmill site and you see it's like a killing field of
Really?
birds.
It's that common?
Yeah,
I'm
and
surprised.
I mean if the birds are constantly flying through the air and all of a sudden they get hit by a 200-mile-an-hour blade of a windmill,
Right.
And more interestingly, how do those windmills get started? It's diesel generators are on the ground. They use diesel generators to get them moving. So the wind does keep them moving, but to get moving, they use diesel generators to get them moving. But everything has consequences. There's no free lunch.
Right,
There's no such thing as a free lunch in economics, and so to say that there's a panacea, well, we haven't seen it yet. Maybe there's some way of free energy. Maybe when nuclear fusion comes around and we're able to harness
fusion
that.
would be awesome.
It would be great if we could harness that, but unfortunately that's simply not in the cards right now. And in
They
terms of
seem like they get really close to it every now and again. You hear about them actually generating more electricity than it took to get this going, but it doesn't seem to be able to repeat it.
no, I mean the three laws of thermodynamics haven't been repealed yet.
No.
So, but no, it's energy is definitely an issue that stays under the radar screen when we probably should spend a lot more time focusing on them because our economy is utterly driven by energy, and particularly in a technologically driven economy, electronic equipment like server farms and things like that require a ton of electricity, and if we're going to be having some of the highest electricity costs in the country, as a consequence, a lot of those high-tech places say, hey, look, let's go down to North Carolina,
Right.
where they have government subsidized electricity. It makes it easier when you have government subsidizing, like the TVA and things like that,
Right.
subsidizing the electricity costs. We don't get that here. In fact, we have a government which are artificially driving up the cost by passing a lot of these mandates. So that's one of those cases where if we want to be more competitive, we need to spend a little more time thinking about how we can get to a position where we're not essentially showing people a door and forcing them out when they want to come here and stay here and do a lot of work here. And that's why I said it's, you mentioned right to work. And certainly we feel it's an important piece of component. But it's also a lot of the jobs, which are the highest end jobs, a lot of the IT jobs and tech jobs, those aren't workforces that tend to be unionized. They tend not to be a case where you say...
What was the actual workforce in New Hampshire that's unionized?
As far as private sector or public
private sector?
Private
really
sector,
small.
it's below 7%, I believe. So
that was a 4 or something.
I've seen several different figures, but
Yeah.
but that's one piece. But the bigger pieces are... but we're saying it's going to be a whole host of things. It's going to be lower electricity costs. Stop shooting yourself in the foot for healthcare. Stop shooting yourself in the foot with business taxes. You have to sort of get rid of doing the things that you're doing that are causing yourself problems, and then maybe you can start to be in an environment where you start pulling the businesses to you.
Yeah, I know that it's, and I feel bad for the kids today because when I was a teenager just getting out of high school and stuff, you couldn't be without a job.
Right.
And then I started learning a little bit of machining, and then I remember in the late 80s or whatever, I was having lunch and some guy says, "Oh yeah, machinist, I've been out of job for 3 months." I says, "You ain't looking."
He said you're not a very good one, right?
Yeah,
I mean, there was a time that was the case where if you were unemployed, it's because either you weren't really good at what you wanted to do as a trade, or you weren't trying very hard.
No, you weren't trying very hard typically.
And so from the perspective of the economy as we are right now, and I think that when you start looking at here in New Hampshire, 0.9% GDP growth. And it's no wonder that we're sort of starting to backslide. But government does have a role in sort of holding us back, and we need to stop. Massachusetts dropped their business tax rate from 9% to 7.9% over this, and that was over a number of years. In New Hampshire, we went from 7% to 8.5%. So we're two states going in different directions from the perspective of making ourselves competitive. And so who would have thought that our business taxes would be higher than Massachusetts? We don't think that naturally. But that's what we're starting to see, and we need to start taking a step back and say, listen, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to accomplish here? And if the goal is to have a thriving economy, why haven't we started taking the steps that are going to get us there?
Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you did mention the unemployment rate, though. We must be doing something right because our unemployment rate is typically the second or third lowest in the nation.
Well, I think at this point, I haven't checked the stats because the statewide just came out yesterday. I believe it was 4.4% for here in New Hampshire. But
some economists consider
it's in the
that
top
almost
10.
full
It's in the
employment.
top 10. But having said that, our workforce. Our workforce participation, like the rest of the country, isn't as high as it could or should be.
Yeah.
And not only that, but I think a lot of it has to do with wages. It's not just people say economy; they necessarily think jobs. And so if there are jobs, then the economy is doing well. But if you go around talking to people, and I do, you find a lot of people who haven't had a raise in 5 years.
Yeah.
Haven't had a raise
Not
in
only
7
that,
years.
they've got jobs like you've got people with college degrees working at McDonald's.
Right.
Yeah, there's
Right.
a lot
They're
of
not even making enough money to live, nor are they even making enough money to pay back their loans.
Their loans, right? But if you look at the people who haven't gotten raises, while at the same time the cost of living is going up, what you find is that people are basically working as hard, but they're not getting ahead. They're paying more, but they're getting less. Their healthcare costs are going up. Their energy costs are going up. Their food costs are going up. Their rents are going up. I haven't seen anybody running around saying, "Oh, my rent just went down." You don't hear that.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing is a sort of a dynamic at place where people have to basically work harder and economize. So they're making tough decisions. And I think we saw that. I think the perfect example of that was the situation with Market Basket. If Market Basket had the same scenario happen to it in, say, 1999, in the middle of the dot-com boom, do you think there would have been customers boycotting and protesting out front? Probably not.
Right.
They would have said, we'll just go and shop at Shaw's, or we'll go
Right.
shop at in 1999 people would go shop at Whole Foods, right?
Yeah.
But we'll go shop at some other Hannaford's. We'll go shop somewhere else. But the fact that they felt as though that's one case where they weren't feeling like they were falling behind. There was one place they had where they feel like they weren't falling behind, and being able to stretch their dollar and keep their standard of living without losing ground. And when that went away, it became like a cause célèbre for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think that I think the media caught on to it because they sensed it, because there were a lot of people getting excited and complaining about it. And so the coverage obviously it kept spiraling upwards, but I think that it's a great example of how people are feeling right now. And so people say, well, the unemployment rate's low. Well, maybe the unemployment
that's actually
rate.
there's another side of that coin, is that the Market Basket obviously treats their employees well enough so people were willing to fight for it.
Right.
But you're still talking about low-paying jobs.
Correct.
I mean, if people were that dedicated to their jobs, they would have already moved on to something that was paying $20 an hour, not 9 or 10.
Well, but it's important to realize that what Market Basket provided was that entry-level position.
right.
So
That's
when
what
you're
it's-
talking
yeah,
about your average 16 or 17-year-old who has no job skills at all
right,
and suddenly has to find their first step on the ladder,
yeah,
they were able to get that at Market Basket. And they
Right.
still are able to get that at Market Basket. And that's one of the challenges I start seeing when people start talking about minimum wage. You know what? At some point, it's not worth the employer's if I'm an employer, I'm not going to hire someone at $10 an hour if they can't give me $10 an hour worth of value.
Right.
And if I can't get $10 an hour value out of you, I'll find a way to work around. If I'm a large company, it's like the McDonald's has a push button screen, and you push buttons here, and something rolls off an assembly line over there. And so they're just going to do more with less because these businesses aren't going to just eat the costs, because they can't just pass the costs along to the consumer.
no, because nobody wants to pay $10 for a hamburger.
Exactly. So you have a dynamic at play in which you have to be able to provide enough value to justify the salary you're making
Yeah.
or the pay you're making, and that's really what I think the Market Basket was doing, and McDonald's do, and a lot of those businesses that people like to denigrate. Walmart say, oh, it's a Walmart job. Well, you know what? If you have no skill at all and you're a 17-year-old and you get a job at Walmart,
That's pretty good.
you're going to start building
Yeah.
skills so that a year from now or 2 years from now, you can get a higher paying job. And that's what we hope. That's what we hope for as a people, so that by the time they get to 25, 30, they're able to have enough money so that they're able to live independently and not live in your basement,
Right.
So they're able to move out of the house and have their own life and move forward.
Can I-
That's right now is what we're losing.
Do you have somebody in your basement?
No, not today.
Oh, good.
The other one, when was the right to work added to the New Hampshire platform?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Because I don't remember it even being an issue when I first got
I
elected.
know it was. As someone I'm not a delegate or going to be voting on Saturday. I'm not participating in that. I mean, that's the platform discussions. Thankfully, is something that I'm happily, because I know a lot of people who are talking about some of this stuff and they want to get into some verbal fisticuffs. That's thankfully. I mean, we're a nonpartisan organization, and I'm glad not to be part of the not to be part of the discussions over the Republican platform.
Right, but no, the reason I'm asking, because when I first was elected, we had people who were clearly rhinos in the Republican Party. We had Dr. Pilliard from up north, who was pro-income tax, pro-sales tax, anti-gun, pro-abortion. If you looked at the Republican platform at that time, he voted against it 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Rhino, as far as I was concerned. So people attacked him and picked on him. There's some other
Unfortunately, as you know, he passed away recently.
whatever. But I get that. But I'm. At what point do you stop attacking people that are with you 60 or 70% of the time, or 80% of the time?
Well, I mean, that's obviously a decision for the party, and they need to make a decision.
No, this is a decision of yours too, because you belong to the group that does do that.
Well, from our perspective, we think it's critical to hold people accountable on issues we think are important. We don't make any surprises about where we stand on the issues. We,
Right.
we let people know
But do
where
you
we
have
stand.
do you have like you named like Reggie, healthcare, right to work,
Business taxes,
business taxes. So if you take all those, do you take all those? and
Medicaid
say-
expansion,
right,
stuff like
do you
that.
take all those issues and say,
Gas
well, you
tax.
voted with us 70% of the time, so we'll deal with that. The reason I asked because my buddy Jim Webb got
Oh,
an attack ad from your organization,
well,
and I think he's with you almost 90% of the time, except the right to work.
And I'll be fairly straightforward. Our job is to have that conversation with the public, and people deserve to know if that's a big issue for them, and if it's not a big issue for them. In Jim Webb's case, it didn't hurt him in any way, shape, or form.
No, I know that,
And
but I'm
he-
saying my question is there a trigger, a percentage at which you say, okay, we got to inform the public about these guys? Because you wouldn't attack somebody that was agreeing with you 90% of the time, because that would be self-defeating.
From our perspective, it's more important to focus on issues, not necessarily on personalities, and that's the way we operate because it's critical to how we are. We are an issues advocacy organization. We're not a party, and we don't want to be a party. We're not a PAC, and we don't want to be a PAC.
Right.
So we don't focus on individuals. And in fact, if we started to focus on individuals and PACs, and act more like a PAC by focusing on individuals, then we would be rightly viewed by a number of folks as acting like a PAC, and some of the stuff that a lot of the people say about the IRS targeting might actually have some validity to it. But so that's why we don't want to be going down that road.
So who did Jim get attacked by then? I thought it was you guys.
Oh no, we did it. We did talk about his fact that he opposes right to work.
I know that. I know. But I think
So when
that-
we say attack, it's just like it's not attacking when you let people know where their elected officials stand on the issues.
I agree. But if it's only that, my question is, in other words, if it was only that one issue,
But again, my point is, it's not about individuals; it's about issues. So we talk about issues and not about
that
personalities.
seems like a contradiction, Greg. If it's not about individuals and then you attack an individual,
Well, we
then
talk
it is
about
individuals.
as I said, we focus on
Are you
holding
running
people
for governor
accountable.
or something?
Not that I'm aware of. and Gary, I assure it's not likely to happen, or if ever, governor or any other position.
Right. But
So, but our focus is and will remain on the issues. We're not a single issue group, like say, for example, right to work, or an issue such as Planned Parenthood, which focuses.
Yeah,
on
you
issues.
actively avoid social issues, right?
We don't get involved in social issues. We don't get
Yeah.
involved in criminal justice issues, foreign policy. There's a whole array of stuff we simply don't, because we believe that if you try to do everything, you do nothing well.
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
actually one of the problems I've had with Cornerstone, because when I first was elected in 2000, it was actually when they were just getting started with Karen Testerman,
Right.
and it was
Purely
basi-
social
it's-
issues.
It's strictly family-oriented social issues, and now they've kind of started going more and more afield. I think when Kevin Smith took over, it started getting. And it's like, you kind of dilute your message when you,
Right.
because I agree. If you stay focused on it, it's like
Have a specialty.
Dave Wheeler's gun group. If you
Right.
look how he scores people, it's not relative to their gun vote. It's like there's the pro-life issue and other things that are thrown into the mix to decide who they're going to assault in the election.
Well, I think it comes down to knowing what you are, being clear at the front end what your issues are and what you're focusing on, and just saying, listen, up front, everyone should know that we're going to be focusing on issues, and these are the issues we're going to focus on.
Right.
And I know a lot of people who didn't like the fact that we let folks know about, for example, that they supported Obamacare's Medicaid expansion.
Right.
If you don't like that, don't cast a
No,
vote.
I absolutely agree. I mean, John Burt's going to have a hard time in his district because he's going up against Evelyn Connor, and he's asking me what to do. And I said, well, just send out a flyer.
More hot dog days.
No, I know, that's why I'm trying to protect him.
It's all back to you.
It's all about me. But I told him, I says, well, just tell him. I says, if I was doing an ad, I would send it out to everybody in Ware and Goffstown and Deering, and it would say something like this: Evelyn Connor's a wonderful lady, but does she represent you? and this is how she voted for the gas tax. She voted for
Medicaid expansion.
Medicaid expansion. She voted for this anti-gun bill, and I did not.
Right.
You know, so
People listen.
So you're saying
ultimately, elections are about contrast. People want to know the differences between the various candidates, and part of a candidate like yourself. Part of your job is to demonstrate to the public what the distinction is between the two, because very few people. It's not like you're going to be running. Basically $500,000 worth of TV ads and MUR for your state rep campaign. So it's not that people are going to take the measure of you.
Can you guys give me enough money to do that?
It never hurts to ask.
That'll really push you over the top, right?
Actually, we are out of time. You know what I wanted to do last term? Remember last term they caught me on the there was the school funding bill, and they interviewed the governor, and they interviewed the speaker, and the majority leader. They interviewed Pete, and Pete said it was all libertarians' fault why it didn't go through. That was funny. And then but anyway.
Oh, the school funding amendment.
Constitutional amendment. And I had stayed in the room, which I wasn't going to because I'd read the thing and I thought it was a bunch of bull. I stayed in the room because I wanted to hear Paul Ingerson speak. And because I have a lot of respect for him. He's a very nice, smart guy. But while I was staying in the room...
A great beard, too.
Yes, and a great beard. While I was staying in the room, I was just sitting there thumbing through Shotgun News. Mm-hmm. Okay? So they go through, they interview all these people, and Channel 9 says, and some people weren't even paying attention. And they shot me from the back, right? And I had, like, the Shotgun News open up, and it was a girl in a bikini holding a shotgun. I told people, if I had enough money... Okay, stupid amount of money, I would have done an attack ad against myself that just happened to come out after the election. Say some people weren't even paying attention and have my picture there and everything else, just because it would have been so funny.
And
probably isn't good.
And you know what? That's the thing is a lot of what goes on in the House floor is actually theater.
It's all theater.
And most people know how they're going to vote beforehand, and having these long discussions. There are time to time. Your fellow who runs with you, Neil Kirk. He's been known to actually swing a vote every now and then.
Oh, yeah, he does. He's
with
smart.
A persuasive floor speech. But for the most part, it is theater.
For the most part, it's all theater. I know there was a Democrat from Keene, I forgot her name, and she was sitting there in the House and playing solitaire or Tetris.
Cynthia Chase.
Cynthia Chase. And it was all over Facebook. Oh, how dare she? And I looked at it and I says, you guys are so full of baloney. I don't agree with anything she votes for. But be honest. Look in front of it. There's nobody else in the room. At least she's in the room. You know. Hey, Greg, we got to go. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye, everybody.